Hello everyone, Brick Horizon here, and this time we have a modification of the yet-to-be-released 75432 V-19 Torrent. Just like the Juggernaut, which I made an alternate build of the UT-AT, you can't even buy this set yet. But today I'm going to tell you how I managed to get this modification out early, and some of the choices I made along the way while designing it. Before I get into the video, I'd also like to mention that the instructions have already been released before the set, and you can find them on Rebrickable with the link in the description. At first, I was really excited to hear that LEGO was bringing back the V-19 Torrent and hoped that even though it would be inevitably downsized, that it would still retain the feature of having all the wings rotate at the same time. Their last version of this set had a really interesting piston and Technic feature that let it gently fold down. It looked cool, and it was one of the most praised features that a set could have. I don't have the set early, but I was able to find the pieces and a speed build that I used to figure out how this thing was built. The wing mechanism is probably the thing that the most people wanted, but there were a few other aesthetic problems that I decided to fix as well, since I knew that a lot of others would also be looking for these fixes. When the V-19 is in its landing position, it's not supposed to look like this. The LEGO model looks very chibi and ends up feeling unrealistic and too thick. LEGO generally likes to over-engineer their sets so that they're the most sturdy and playable. I'm looking at you 75413 Republic Juggernaut, so they had to add these extra support pieces. I don't think that they were totally necessary since the wings are already 2 plates thick, so I reduced the size of the supports. When I put it back on the set, I'd already modified the back fin, and I decided that they needed to be longer, so I added about 2 more studs in length, and that seemed to fix the problem. I even took an extra look at some reference pictures to see if there was anything else I could change. The stud shooters are another thing that I know a lot of people don't really like on their models. I think that they don't look bad and are kind of accurate because the base of the nozzle does have an extra part on it, but it's just too big. So I added a few extra pieces and changed the look of it so that it's sleeker and matches the look just a little bit better. There are a few smaller details that I also wanted to talk about, mainly on the bottom. Originally, to keep the wings on the side from extending farther than they needed, there was a bushing piece that was attached to the joint clip and a Technic piece on the bottom to stop it. I wanted to completely remove these two so that I could make everything more sleek, but they ended up playing an important role later down the line, so I eventually added them back, even though it's a little different than before. Another thing that I added to the bottom was this landing tract. While I would have liked to make something that functions as a hidden landing gear, there wasn't really enough room for this, and it would have required so many changes that it practically would have been its own separate LEGO MOC. This was also necessary because of two things. Firstly, I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't tip over. If you get this model and it still tips over, just move these back and it should be fine. The other thing is that the new gears I implemented would have touched the ground, so I wanted to add some space to it. There's also a piece that you might recognize if you built my UT-AT alt build. You'll probably have a lot of these left over because I wasn't able to find something to do with them. However, this is one of the uses. To hold all the Technic gears in place, I used the thin triangle lift arm on both sides. Other than this being a good use of the piece, it also saves you a bit of money if you decided to do both. Another change that I knew I would have to make is getting rid of the anti-studs on the side of the back fin. I'm glad this doesn't look like Ahsoka's shuttle, where there's absolutely nothing on the other side of the wing, but I still like it better when you're able to make things smooth while keeping the LEGO look. One of my bigger projects was making a UCS version of the ISB shuttle from Andor, and it taught me a few things that I use regularly to make sure that big fins especially can stay stable. This uses a Technic beam through the fin to connect all of the bricks. I also use the snot technique to connect the engine, and from there also to connect the top of the wing. Another idea that I almost took from my ISB shuttle mock was again in the wings. To get the red stripe, I tried connecting plates on either side of this piece with a thick ring attachment, but I ran into some problems with keeping it together, so I decided to switch gears. Instead of making it with plates in some parts, I went all in with the studs not on top. Since I knew that the top portion of the fin had to be at a 30-degree angle, I chose the 1x1 cheese slopes and offset them with brackets so that they would be flat. The only problem now was connecting the dark red part. I originally came up with a few ideas that didn't look good, or would have only worked if they actually connected to it, but I eventually came up with this. Using the bar and clip piece to make the dark red line out of studs not on top is a really interesting way to put this kind of detail together. I also flipped the clip upside down because there would otherwise have been a gap between the hinge and the slope. To make sure we don't run into the same problem as the original set, I covered most of the anti-studs on this part with an inverted tile. You might not have noticed this, but you usually want the colors to completely match. However, there are no dark red hinge pieces. In this scenario, I did what a lot of other mock builders would do, and went with reddish brown. This color is close enough to dark red to not be noticeable unless you're really looking at it. I also used the same technique here on the larger part of the fin, but using the grill slopes to get the 18-degree angle and I didn't need to flip the clips to fill any gaps, so it just uses regular tiles. I also took advantage of the fact that you can see the larger piece from the outside, so that one is brown instead of the other way around. One more detail that I noticed is how the fin has this extra notch that you can clearly see in the picture. I made sure to add this because it's kind of interesting and it's a little bit of character that I think is much needed. The first change I wanted to make was bringing back the wing function. I noticed that the set itself uses ball joints that are pretty strong on their own, and I could probably use this to my advantage. That's when I got my first idea of how to fix this set. I figured that I could keep one of the ball joints in the front and then connect the rest of the wings to a Technic gear system that connects the back. So I removed one of the joints and replaced it with this, a Technic gear with an axle part. Although I should mention that there is one thing that I don't think I could have done differently. There is a large tan gear that is completely essential, and it only exists in a few colors. Unless you're willing to pay more than $4 for this piece in white, which is more than the cost of the modified instructions, I don't think it's really worth it. There was one potential alternative, and that is using the clutch gear, but for some reason, I seem to have lost mine, so I wasn't able to test anything out with it. But I know for a fact that it doesn't align with the other gear and axle piece, so even though it would have matched the other colors, it would have added some otherwise unnecessary bulk. Now I was able to connect it to the system and the other gears seamlessly, but it didn't end up being that simple. The two axles that connect each system are both perpendicular and on two different layers, meaning that I would need to find a way to go down one layer and turn while keeping the motion fluid. Unfortunately, I ran into another problem, and this took most of my time to figure out. Gears in LEGO and real life has something in common. Each gear has a specified number of teeth that allow it to turn a certain amount. I actually started on this idea because I was trying to make something else, but got sidetracked and made this gear system with a flywheel instead. It's pretty cool, but I ended up learning that to get the right ratio of gears, I would need to do some math. The fin on the back is able to spin a whole 180 degrees, while the wings on the side would be limited to 135 degrees. That ratio would simplify to 1 to 1.33. On this graph, you could see that these gears would line up. However, it doesn't seem to work as when you put these two gears together, they don't actually line up. That's because LEGO's system has two different types of gears, and they're separated in an interesting way. The gears that can interact with each other are either beveled, meaning that they don't have sharp corners, or they're straight. But because they don't work together, I needed to find a new way to make this work. On the first V-19 Torrent, the side wings can't actually extend to 135 degrees because they use a different set of gears. The actual angle ends up being about 108 degrees, so it's not perfect, but it still looks fine. The new one doesn't have that, but instead the wings are loose, and it actually connects to the top of the bottom with clip pieces. Eventually, I decided to test the gears in real life, and I ended up finding something really interesting. I made a small mock of the set in real life because I wanted to make sure that it would actually work. Even if the ratio of the gears wasn't right, I came up with this. It shows how the idea is supposed to work, but it also highlighted a few problems with my idea. The gear right here is what's called an idler. Because it's stuck between two gears of the same size, it doesn't matter how much the first one moves, the amount of teeth traveled remains the same. This meant that all the talk earlier about trying to make this the perfect 1 to 1.33 ratio wouldn't work. But something very interesting happened. I was playing around with it and noticed that this piece was very floppy. There was so much space between the gears that it allowed an extra 23 degrees of space between the top and the bottom so that it could connect to the clips on the original model. I accidentally came up with a solution to something that I was starting to doubt could even be done. I don't think this is an illegal technique because there is a natural tolerance that is built into the gears, but even if it is, it exerts so little force on the Technic that it shouldn't affect anything. The only thing I will say is I recommend only rotating the wings by the back fin. Since it's at the center of the system, it would have the most effective transfer of rotation. If you're excited about the August wave of sets, or you want to see more mocks like this, let me know in the comments below. Like I said at the beginning of the review, I also made instructions for this before the official release so that you can make this as soon as possible. Because some of the recolors in this set are not out yet, I've had to mark some of the pieces as no color or any color. I also did this for the UTAT alt build, but you can remove those from your list if you plan on getting only the extra pieces. Otherwise, I'll be updating the instructions to fix that once the set is officially released. Anyways, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.